This video is the fifth in a series documenting my experience of the Precure franchise. If you have not yet done so, I recommend at least watching the video immediately before this one in the series, because the Precure season that is the focus of this video is a direct sequel to the last one. Spoilers maybe, also I need to go off on a couple of tangents before I get to the show proper. If you want to skip the tangents, timecode. First off, you ever have one of those moments where you step back, take a look at yourself and go, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Well, watching this season of Precure was like one giant one of those moments. Look at me. Here I am, a bloody adult, getting ready to graduate college, watching a long-ass cartoon intended for children, and talking about it on the internet at length. I did the math. As of now, I've watched 242 episodes of this series plus 5 movies. Counting the video you're watching right now, I've made 5 videos on the series, each of which takes hours and hours of effort to write and edit. Add that all up, and you get a fuck-ton more time than any reasonable person should ever dedicate to an idea this dumb. That idea being what I'm doing right now, talking about a children's show on the internet, because I feel like it. There's no greater point or moral lesson here. I think I'm just sad. At this point, I've got Precure fatigue. I've watched more of this franchise than almost any other, anime or otherwise. It took me longer to watch this season than any previous, and that's because I'm getting tired and need a break. That doesn't mean I'm stopping. Gotta get to Heartcatch someday, after all. But for now, I'm gonna put this one aside and see if I can make a dent in my ever-growing backlog. More importantly, though, I need to correct what I believe to be a mistake from the previous video. Last time I went on a whole tirade about how I find the whole idol thing to be weird, and how it felt particularly weird to be forcing one of the main characters into that role. I stand by some of what I said, namely that I don't get the whole idol thing, and that the whole episode where Urara was pressured into doing the singing thing was really off-putting, but one rather important detail was wrong. Urara was never made an idol. She got up on stage and sung a lot, but it was never in silly costume, and the word idol was never actually dropped by the show, according to my recollection. So, yeah. I have no idea how I came to misinterpret what happened so badly, and I apologize for any confusion. I still think it was really bizarre how she was pressured into singing, but whatever, at least she's not an idol. Alright, tangents over. Time to get to the show proper. I went off on those tangents because, frankly, there's not terribly much to say about this season, at least not as much as I managed to squeeze out of the last one. How did I do that? As a continuation of Yes 5, GoGo doesn't have a lot new to offer. The main cast, with one exception, remains fairly static, and the few new characters don't add much. On an aesthetic level, nothing has changed from last time. Essentially, this season is the same as the last, just with less interesting things going on. The most notable improvement in this season of Precure stems from the worst part of the last. In the last video, I got rather mad at a little character called Milk, who was actually the worst thing ever. Milk was not absent this season, but thankfully her character was retooled to such an extent that she usually seemed like an entirely different and much more enjoyable person. In the previous season, Milk was not only a static character, but an unpleasant one, meaning she was a constant source of irritation. In this season, thankfully, she changes for the better. First off, she gets her own human form and becomes her own magical girl. Not a Precure in name, but she fights alongside them anyway. But her becoming a magical girl wasn't what made her tolerable. In fact, my immediate reaction when the show first revealed this was something along the lines of "No, God, please no," because the memories of her previous appearances still plagued me. She was a cool fighter, but that on its own could not have redeemed a toxin of a character. I'm able to tolerate her this time around, mostly because she grows up a little. Contrary to her appearances in the previous season, Milk, who takes on the human alias Kurumi Mimino, a much better name that I shall use from now on to distinguish between the Milk of the previous season and the Kurumi of this one, is not a static character. Over the course of this season, Kurumi learns to appreciate the rest of the group and becomes an invaluable partner to them. Instead of bickering with Nozomi at any and every given opportunity, Kurumi boldly fights alongside Nozomi and all of Precure, which makes her much easier to get behind. She retains some characteristics that make her who she is, namely her obsession with serving cocoa and nuts, but those aren't blown out of proportion. She's more level-headed, a more approachable person. Kurumi is Milk matured, still Milk at her core, but much easier to get along with, and braver and accepting of her role as a magical girl. Overall, Kurumi is a much more tolerable and, dare I say, likable version of herself than the Milk of the previous season, and she is the one and only notable improvement that this season has over the previous. The most interesting aspect of the previous season was watching all 5 of the Precure grow. Most of them matured from kids with hobbies and doubts to young adults, still teenagers, with passions and ambitions for the future, each with a career in mind. Simply put, the Precure developed. In this season, they're all static. They've already learned all the lessons, all found their passions in life, already had their story arcs come to fruition, so there isn't a whole lot left for them to do. In this season, at most, we see them make some minute progress toward their dreams, but that's it. Otherwise, they don't change. They have nothing left to learn, they do not grow, which is less interesting than watching them mature over the course of a season. They can spout off speeches about recycled friendship lessons all day, but they rarely learn something new. Take episode 22, for instance. Rin's siblings need help with their homework. Nozomi volunteers to help them because, as we learned last season, her ambition is to become a teacher. She initially struggles to teach some basic math to them, but eventually manages to communicate it well when she comes up with some clever real-world metaphors. On the one hand, it was nice to see Nozomi do a somewhat successful job working hard at her passion. On the other hand, this event didn't actually accomplish anything narratively. We already know Nozomi works hard at her passions, and that she wants to teach from the previous season. Showing her teach these kids is essentially just jamming those two traits together, something the viewer could easily assume would happen anyway without being told it. We're not being shown Nozomi's path to becoming a teacher, we're just peeking at a random practice session, one that ultimately doesn't lead to anything. Nozomi hasn't accomplished her dream by the end of the season. She ends in the same place that she began. As a result, this stepping stone of a practice session seems more like a pebble. It won't help anyone across a river, and is largely inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. The only saving grace for these characters is that I was already invested in them from the previous 49 episodes. Going in, I already really liked these characters, so I was happy to see more of them, but that's all this season is. More of the same. Nothing new to shake up the formula, none of the Precure growing anymore, only episode after episode of them being nice friends and also beating the crap out of random monsters. If it weren't for Kurumi turning out to be actually good, there would be nothing noteworthy about any of these characters, and that's a damn shame, because character growth was the strong suit of the last season. Without it, there's not terribly much to talk about. There's some cool fight animation here and there, more frequently this season than ever before. As these seasons go on, the fights keep getting cooler, and this season is no exception. For its shortage in character drama, there was no shortage of eye-candy fight scenes. The villains were not particularly memorable, with the exception of Dio and Bunby. I call this guy Dio because I don't remember his actual name, and I don't care to look it up, and this is the second time Takehito Koyasu has voiced a character in Precure, the first one being Nagisa's dad way back in Futariwa. As for Bunby, he's the only recurring villain from Season 1. All the others got mercilessly slaughtered by Precure except him, and the big bad, but who cares about her. And he's the only villain to survive this season's slaughter as well. He bumbles around a lot and no one takes him seriously, so he acts as a comic relief character more than an actual villain, and I must admit, I was smitten by Bunby's bumbling antics. Best part about him, though, was that he actually got to redeem himself in the end by helping Precure. Since the show had gone out of its way to keep him around and make him likable despite his being on the wrong team, I was glad that he got to be a cool guy in the end.
Bunby-san, arigato.
And finally, this season's movie, actually probably the best part this time around. It's got its usual assortment of better-than-usual fight animation, but what really makes this movie stand out is how it is a little more overt in its subversion of gender roles than the rest of the series has been up until this point. There's a whole discussion to be had on how the series does or does not comment on gender roles, and that discussion deserves its own video, which I may or may not make in the future, and I'm not trying to get on any sort of political stance here. I just want to point out how seriously awesome this movie's handling of gender roles was. That might sound like a contradictory statement, but let's do it anyway. The movie opened with Coco recounting to Nozomi the story of Sleeping Beauty, and Nozomi gets excited talking about how she wants to be a princess awoken by a kiss. Admittedly, when I first saw this, not knowing where it was going, this scene made me roll my eyes, but when I saw where it went, I got just as excited as Nozomi there. Later in the movie, Coco gets brainwashed. In a complete reversal of the expected roles, he is awoken from this state when Nozomi kisses him. Instead of the noble prince saving the princess saves the prince. And that made me go, fuck yeah! First off, yes, 5 has been teasing the Nozomi-Coco romance for fucking ever now, so seeing them kiss was a satisfying payoff for around 90 episodes of build-up. Second of all, as much as or more than girls dressing up and kicking ass, that kiss works as a moment of, for lack of a better term, girl power. It takes a scenario that can be read as symbolic of men asserting dominance over women, as it does feature a man saving a helpless woman, and flips it around, so instead the woman demonstrates her own power by rescuing the man. And this from a Precure movie. It's fucking rad. And that's about it, really. That's yes, Precure 5 GoGo. It's okay, except for that title. Since I enjoyed the last season a lot, I was happy to watch these characters more, but didn't add enough new elements to wholly justify its existence. I'd only recommend watching it if you really enjoyed the previous season and just want to see more of these characters. Otherwise, thanks for sitting through my ramblings about a children's magical cartoon show. If you enjoyed this, stick around, there's more where it came from on its way, eventually. If you have something to say, leave a comment. Believe it or not, I do enjoy reading every single one I get. Thanks again for watching, and now if you'll excuse me, hear the show Made in Abyss is supposed to be really good. Gonna go check that out. See you later.